Babylon. You've heard the word. You think you know what it means. You're wrong, because behind that word is a story that started in a scorching desert 3,000 years ago and hasn't ended yet. The story of a city that was burned to the ground, flooded, erased from the face of the earth, and came back every single time. The story of rulers whose names ended up in the Bible, and not only as heroes. The story of a tower that made people stop understanding each other. And the story of a woman in purple with a golden cup, who the last book of the Bible calls the mother of all abominations on earth. Who is she? What's in the cup? And why did the author of Revelation, writing at the close of the 1st century, choose that name, the name of a city that no longer existed, for the most terrifying image of the end of days? This is not just the history of an ancient city. This is the story of power, pride, money, and blood. Of how the greatest empires collapse, and why it always happens exactly the same way. Of what is written in a book read by 2 billion people, and what most of them never notice is there. Watch until the end, because at the finish I'm going to ask you one question. Simple, one sentence. And after that question, you will not be able to look at what's happening around you the same way you did before. Let's go. Babylon. Everyone knows the word, but almost no one understands what it actually means. The first metropolis in human history. Not Rome, not Athens, not Alexandria. Babylon. A city that existed at a time when most of what we call civilization simply did not exist yet. While Europe was covered in forests and populated by tribes that had no written language, Babylon already had multi-story temples, functioning markets, operating courts, and written laws. Its population, by some estimates, reached up to 200,000 people, a number unimaginable for the ancient world. The first city that could truly be called a city. This refers to a period when most of the peoples of the earth were still counting time by hunting seasons. But Babylon is not just history. It is also a religious verdict. The Bible mentions this city more than any other, with the sole exception of Jerusalem. And it does not mention it with admiration. In the book of Genesis, it is here that humanity presumed to make itself equal to God and paid the price. In the book of Daniel, it is here that a king dreams of a colossus on feet of clay, a symbol of any great empire destined to collapse. And in the Revelation of John, Babylon is no longer just a city. It is a name, a title, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth, the dwelling of the Antichrist, a kingdom destined to burn in a single hour. The uncomfortable question is this: what if this is not about antiquity? What if it is about right now? Because in modern political language, the word Babylon has long since become a metaphor. Globalism, the mixing of cultures, a single market, a single agenda, a single language of power. All of this is what its opponents call the new Babylon. Not by accident, they have read the same book, and they know how the first Babylon ended. This refers to one of those rare cases where an ancient text and modern politics are saying the same thing, just in different words. 3,000 years ago, Babylon was the capital of the known world. 100 years ago, it was excavated from the sand. Today its name is used in political speeches, in religious sermons, and in conspiracy theories. The city is long gone, but the idea lives on. And here is what matters most to understand from the very beginning. The history of Babylon is not a success story. It is the story of how the most powerful city of the ancient world rose from the ruins again and again, and in the end disappeared regardless. It was burned, flooded, looted, divided between empires, and each time it came back, until one day it did not. Why? Who is to blame? And is there a lesson here, or only ruins? That is what comes next. Nobody knows when Babylon was founded. That is not a caveat or academic modesty. It is a fact. One of the most famous cities in human history has no official date of birth, no named founder, no founding legend, the kind that Rome and Carthage have. Babylon simply appeared. It grew from nothing in the middle of a scorching desert plain in southern Mesopotamia, in what is today Iraq. And that alone already tells us something important. This city was not anyone's project. It was an inevitability. Mesopotamia, in Greek, means land between the rivers, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is where, according to most historians, urban civilization as such was born. Not in Egypt, not in China, not in India. Here, on this flat, blistering, wind-swept plain where summer temperatures climb above 50 degrees Celsius and where no field survives without artificial irrigation. People came here not because it was comfortable. They came because it was possible. The rivers gave water, water gave crops, crops gave surplus, surplus gave trade, trade gave a city. This refers to a mechanism that repeated itself throughout history. Great cities do not grow where things are beautiful, they grow where things are profitable. Babylon was located in the historical region of Akkad, the southern part of Mesopotamia. The first confirmed written mention of the city dates to the 22nd century BCE. In that text, it is called by its Sumerian name, Kadingira, a direct translation, Gate of God. Even in the very first name we know for this city, there is already a claim to special status. Not merely a settlement, not merely a market, a gate, a passage between worlds, a place where the earthly and the divine make contact. At that time, Babylon was a subordinate city within the Akkadian Empire, one of the earliest centralized states in history. It was nothing remarkable. A routine administrative outpost, one of many points on the map of an expanding empire. No one then could have imagined that this particular city would, within a few centuries, become the center of the known world. The patron deity of the city was Marduk, the supreme Sumerian Akkadian god, creator and god of order, who defeated chaos and fashioned the world from it. According to Babylonian myth, it was Marduk who slew the monster Tiamat and formed the sky and earth from her body. This is not merely religion, this is politics. A city whose patron is the god of creation and cosmic order automatically claims a central place in the universe. The priests of Marduk understood perfectly what they were doing. The cult of the god and the cult of the city were built simultaneously, brick by brick, prayer by prayer. This refers to the oldest known political technique. Control over religion is control over people. Between the 28th and 14th centuries BCE, Babylon remained an unremarkable city-state. 14 centuries of relative obscurity. 14 centuries during which other cities, Ur, Uruk, Nippur, Lagash, shone, made war, and ruled Mesopotamia. Babylon was somewhere on the margins of those events. A province, a quiet place with a large temple and modest ambitions. But provinces sometimes take their revenge, and Babylon took its revenge in full. It is worth understanding the scale of what we are talking about. A city that existed for more than 3,000 years. For comparison, from the founding of Rome to the present day is roughly 2,800 years. Babylon is older than that span of time. It survived dozens of rulers, several complete destructions, and the replacement of languages, religions, and peoples. And still it rose again. There is something almost inexplicable in this, unless you know precisely where it stood and why that location was so valuable that empires fought over it again and again across millennia. Location determines everything. Babylon stood at the crossroads of trade routes running between the north and south of Mesopotamia. Through it passed goods, armies, ideas, and money. To take Babylon was to take hold of an entire region's main artery. That is why it was seized by force so many times. and that is why it was rebuilt so many times, even by those who had just destroyed it. This refers to the simple logic of power. What cannot be destroyed must be claimed. In the 19th century BCE, Babylon was taken by outsiders, people who had no connection to this city whatsoever, people who had never built temples, palaces, or legal codes. Nomads, the Amorites, Semitic tribes who came from the Syrian steppe. They knew nothing of urban life. They lived in tents, drove livestock, and fought among themselves. By the standards of Babylonian city dwellers, they were barbarians, people without culture, without writing, without gods worthy of respect. And those same barbarians founded one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. This is not an exception to the rules of history. This is the rule of history. Rome was built by the Latins, a tribe that neighboring peoples initially did not take seriously. Before the 7th century CE, the Arabs were scattered desert tribes, and then within 100 years, they seized territory stretching from Spain to India. The Mongols came from the steppe and created the largest contiguous land empire in history. Again and again, it was precisely those considered peripheral who turned out to be the next central force. The Amorites were no exception. This refers to a pattern that tends to go unnoticed. Civilizations are most often built by those who arrived from outside and saw opportunity where the locals saw only habit. The Amorites took Babylon in the 19th century BCE, during a period when all of Mesopotamia was experiencing political turbulence following the collapse of the great empire of III. The old system had fallen apart. Power was fragmented. Several city-states were competing for regional dominance. It was at precisely this moment that Amorite chieftains, men with military minds and no sentimentality toward the old order, seized Babylon and immediately understood what they held in their hands. They saw what no one before them had fully appreciated. Babylon stood at the point where all roads converged. The north and south of Mesopotamia, the trade routes to the Persian Gulf and to the Mediterranean, the river routes along the Euphrates, all of this passed through Babylon or near it. Whoever controlled this city controlled the entire region by the throat. The Amorites understood this, and they acted accordingly. The first Amorite rulers of Babylon did what intelligent conquerors have always done. They did not destroy the culture they had taken. They integrated themselves into it. They adopted the local gods, above all Marduk, and declared him their own. They absorbed the Sumerian Akkadian writing system and administrative traditions. They began to build palaces, temples, walls, canals, and they declared Babylon the capital of a new kingdom. So in the 19th century BCE, the Babylonian kingdom was formally established, not through slow organic development, not through peaceful transfer of power, through conquest, through calculation, through the decision of outsiders to invest in a foreign city and make it their own. This refers to a principle that has held true across every era. The greatness of a city is not determined by who founded it, but by who invested in it. The first century and a half of the Babylonian kingdom was a period of continuous construction and political maneuvering. The Amorite kings expanded their territory gradually, making skilled use of alliances, marriages, and wars in the right proportion. They did not rush to conquer everything at once. They waited. They accumulated strength. They made agreements with neighbors and broke them at precisely the moment when doing so was advantageous. The typical logic of men who had traveled the road from a nomadic tent to a royal throne and held no illusions about the nature of power. Babylon grew. The population increased. Trade expanded. The temple of Marduk, the Esagila, became ever larger and wealthier. The priests accumulated influence. The merchants accumulated fortunes. The officials constructed a bureaucratic apparatus. The city was becoming a true capital, with all the institutions that word implies. And all of this happened without particular fanfare, without grand declarations, without enormous wars. Babylon simply grew, methodically, deliberately, unstoppably, until the day a man came to the throne who decided it was time to stop growing quietly. His name was Hammurabi, but that is the next story. Hammurabi came to power in the year 1793 BCE. At that time, the Babylonian kingdom was a mid-sized state by Mesopotamian standards. Not the weakest, but far from the strongest. Around it stood other kingdoms: Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, Assyria. All of them competed for dominance in the region. All of them considered themselves the leading power, and none of them regarded the young Babylonian king as a serious threat. That was their last shared mistake. Hammurabi ruled for 43 years, from 1793 to 1750 BCE. Over those 4 decades, he transformed a mid-sized kingdom into the hegemon of all Mesopotamia. He did this without haste and without any straight line. He spent the first years of his reign consolidating internal administration, building irrigation canals and temples, and accumulating resources. He made alliances with his neighbors and waited patiently while they exhausted one another in wars. Then he struck, one by one, methodically, without unnecessary urgency. This refers to a type of ruler that history rarely produces, a man with enough self-restraint not to go to war when everyone around him is fighting, and to strike precisely when his opponent is already spent. By the end of his reign, Hammurabi had united most of Mesopotamia under Babylon's rule. Larsa fell. Mari was destroyed. Eshnunna was subjugated. Assyria was temporarily brought to heel. Babylon became for the first time not merely a large city, but the capital of a genuine empire. And it was at this precise moment that Hammurabi did what made his name immortal. Not as a conqueror, but as a builder of states. He issued a code of laws, 282 articles, inscribed in cuneiform on a black diorite stele more than 2 meters tall. Today, that stele is kept in the Louvre in Paris and is one of the museum's most visited exhibits. At the top of the stele is a carved relief. Hammurabi stands before Shamash, the god of the sun and of justice, who hands him the laws. The message is unambiguous. These laws do not come from a man, they come from a god. To challenge them is to challenge the will of the heavens. This refers to a political technique that has not aged a single day since. Laws sanctified in the name of a god are obeyed far more readily than laws invented by men. What exactly did the Code of Hammurabi regulate? Virtually everything that mattered in the daily life of ancient society. Commercial transactions and debt obligations, property rights over land and houses, terms for hiring workers and rates of pay, family law, marriage, divorce, inheritance, criminal offences and their punishments. Professional liability, separate articles governed the conduct of physicians, builders and boatmen. If a house you built collapsed and killed the owner, you answered with your life. If a physician botched an operation on a free man and cost him his hand, the physician lost his hand as well. The principle of talion, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Not as savagery, as a system. As an attempt to make punishment proportionate to the crime and predictable for all members of society. At the same time, the code was not equal for everyone. Babylonian society was divided into 3 classes: free citizens, mushkenu, people of dependent status, and slaves. Punishment for the same offense differed depending on who committed it and against whom. A free citizen who struck another free citizen paid a fine. That same free citizen who struck a person of higher social standing received a public flogging. Slaves stood apart in this system. They were property, and the laws concerning them were the laws of property. This refers to what is commonly called the injustice of ancient systems, but which was in reality simply an honest codification of what existed in every society of that era, and if one is being truthful, continues to exist in various forms to this day. It is important to understand, the Code of Hammurabi was not the first body of law in history outright. Earlier Sumerian legal texts existed before it, in particular, the laws of Ur-Nammu, dating to approximately the 21st century BCE. But the Code of Hammurabi is the most complete, most detailed, and best preserved legal document of the ancient world known to us. That is why it is conventionally called the first, not chronologically, but in terms of its significance and the breadth of what it covers. The influence of this document on the legal culture of the ancient Near East continued for centuries after Hammurabi himself was gone. His norms were copied, cited, and reinterpreted by subsequent rulers. Some scholars find parallels between the Code of Hammurabi and certain provisions of the Old Testament, particularly in the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy. No one has proven direct borrowing, but the resemblance is too obvious to dismiss as coincidence. Hammurabi died around the year 1750 BCE. After him, the Babylonian kingdom held its position for some time, but already began to decline. His sons and grandsons inherited neither his military talent nor his political composure. The empire he had spent 43 years building began to crumble roughly one generation after his passing. This is almost always what happens. Great builders rarely leave great successors behind. What they leave behind are great ruins, and great laws that outlive both the ruins and the builders themselves. After Hammurabi, Babylon entered an era that historians politely describe as a period of instability. In practice, this meant the following. The city was ravaged by anyone strong enough to reach it. The Hittites, the Kassites, the Assyrians, the Elamites. Every few generations, a new conqueror arrived, took the city by storm, looted its temples, installed his own man on the throne, and within some time was himself swept away by the next conqueror. Babylon changed hands like a valuable object at a bazaar that everyone wants to buy, no one can hold, and which continues to exist in spite of all its owners. This went on for roughly 6 centuries, 600 years of unrelenting upheaval. For comparison, that is the same span of time that has passed from the fall of Constantinople to today, an entire epoch, and the city survived. This refers to what is conventionally called historical resilience, but which in practice is something simpler and harder. A location so valuable that it cannot be abandoned. It can be destroyed. It can be looted, but it cannot be left behind. The first blow came in the 16th century BCE. The Hittites, a powerful state from Asia Minor that created one of the first professional armies in history, launched a bold raid deep into Mesopotamia. Around 1595 BCE, the Hittite king Mursili I took Babylon. He looted it. He carried off its treasures and the statue of Marduk himself, the city's chief deity. This was not merely a military humiliation, it was a religious desecration. The god had been stolen. A wound had been inflicted on the city that took decades to heal. But the Hittites did not stay. They took what they wanted and left. Too far from their own bases, too exposed on foreign territory. And into the vacuum that formed, others immediately flooded. The Kassites came from the mountains, from the eastern highlands that today belong to Iran. Who exactly they were remains a subject of debate among historians. Their language is not related to any known linguistic family. Their origins are obscure. But their rule turned out to be unexpectedly long. The Kassite dynasty held power in Babylon for nearly 4 centuries, from the 16th to the 12th century BCE. This is one of the longest periods of stable rule in the city's entire history. One might think this was good news. It was not. The Kassite period was one of cultural and political decline. Under the Kassites, Babylon ceased to be the capital. The administrative center was relocated to another city. No major construction was undertaken. Intellectual life faded. The great traditions of Babylonian science, literature, and law established under Hammurabi were not developed. They were merely maintained, barely, like a glowing ember beneath a layer of ash. This refers to a phenomenon that recurred many times throughout history. Conquerors arriving from outside a civilization are not always capable of continuing it. They may preserve it, but not advance it. Yet it was during precisely this period that something occurred which would define Babylon's fate for centuries to come. The city, having lost its political significance, began to accumulate religious significance. The Temple of Marduk, the Esagila, became an increasingly important sacred center for the entire region. Pilgrims came to Babylon not because power resided here. They came because the god resided here. Or more precisely, because the chief god resided here. And this gave the city something more durable than political dominance, a sacred status that did not depend on who sat on the throne. Around 1223 BCE, Babylon was seized and looted by the Assyrians. Assyria, by that time, was becoming one of the most ruthless military powers of the ancient world, a state that built its strength on systematic terror and exemplary brutality toward the defeated. The Babylonian sack was for the Assyrians a routine matter, part of policy, a demonstration of who held regional supremacy. But even the Assyrians could not afford to destroy Babylon entirely. Its sacred authority was too great. Too many peoples of the region regarded it as a holy city. Looting it was possible. Erasing it from the map was politically impossible. It would have enraged too many. Within a few decades, the next century brought the Elamites from the territory of what is now southwestern Iran, and they showed no restraint whatsoever. The Elamite invasion was perhaps the most devastating thing Babylon had experienced to that point. The city was ravaged to the point where the question was no longer one of changing rulers, but of physical annihilation. Temples were demolished, districts were burned. The statue of Marduk was stolen again, for the second time in a matter of centuries. Liberation came from the rulers of the city of Isin, a small Mesopotamian center that took upon itself the role of defender of the Babylonian tradition. The kings of Isin returned the statue of Marduk. They restored part of what had been destroyed. They declared themselves the rightful heirs of Babylonian statehood. This was a gesture not merely military, but symbolic. Whoever returns the god to his temple earns the right to call himself the legitimate ruler. But in the 11th century BCE, the dynasty of Isin fell as well. Babylonia descended into chaos. Central authority vanished. The region fragmented into pieces controlled by various tribes and local rulers. And here lies a paradox that is difficult to explain rationally. At this time, Babylon had no strong king, no army, no political influence. It was a city without a state, yet it continued to exist. It continued to draw people. It continued to function as a commercial and religious center, because for this, no empire was required. What was required was tradition, reputation, and a god in whom all the surrounding peoples believed. Babylon outlasted the Hittites. It outlasted the Kassites. It outlasted the Assyrians and the Elamites. It outlasted the collapse of the Isin dynasty. It outlasted every conqueror who seized it, looted it, and declared it his own. And each time another conqueror vanished from the historical stage, Babylon remained, battered, stripped, but alive. This was not luck. This was geography plus religion plus trade, a formula that proved more durable than any army. There was a moment in Babylon's history when the city ceased to exist. Not declined, not fell into ruin. It ceased to exist, physically, completely, without remainder. This happened in the 7th century BCE, and the man responsible was the Assyrian king Sennacherib, a man who decided it was time to be done with Babylon once and for all. Sennacherib ruled Assyria from 704 to 681 BCE. This was one of the most ruthless military powers of the ancient world, a state built on fear, iron discipline, and the exemplary destruction of anyone who dared resist. Assyrian kings deliberately cultivated a reputation for merciless rule. It was a strategy. A city that knew what had happened to the last rebel would think 3 times before rising up again. Babylon thought about it, and rose up anyway. Throughout Sennacherib's reign, Babylon gave him no peace. Revolts broke out one after another. The city would submit, then rise against Assyrian authority again, seek allies among neighboring peoples, conclude secret agreements with Assyria's enemies. Sennacherib suppressed each uprising, harshly, methodically, with mounting frustration. But Babylon would not settle down. In 689 BCE, the king's patience ran out. What happened next had no precedent in Mesopotamian history. Sennacherib did not merely take the city by storm, he made a decision to destroy it entirely, so that nothing of Babylon would remain. No walls, no temples, no streets, no people. The entire population was either put to the sword or driven into slavery. Palaces and temples were demolished to their foundations. The statue of Marduk, the god who had already been stolen twice by enemies, was destroyed. The city itself was set on fire, and when the fire had done its work, Sennacherib ordered the waters of the Euphrates diverted onto the ruins, to flood what remained after the burning and wash away even the memory of the city. He left an inscription explaining his decision. Babylon had been destroyed by the will of the gods, who had grown wrathful toward its inhabitants. This was the standard formula of Assyrian propaganda. Every action of the king was performed with divine approval. But behind that formula lay something real. Sennacherib wanted not merely to punish Babylon, he wanted to cancel it, to make this place cease to be a city, cease to be a symbol, cease to be anything at all. This refers to one of the oldest political misconceptions. An idea cannot be destroyed by demolishing the place associated with it. The place can be destroyed, but the idea will move elsewhere, or remain in the same spot, beneath the ruins, and wait. Babylon waited 8 years. In 681 BCE, Sennacherib was killed by his own sons. A palace coup, a conspiracy within the family. The man who had erased the greatest city of the region from the face of the earth was not brought down by an outside enemy. He was destroyed by those he considered closest. After a brief struggle for power, another of his sons took the throne, Esarhaddon. And Esarhaddon made a decision that shocked all of Assyria. He ordered Babylon to be rebuilt, completely, from nothing, at the expense of the Assyrian treasury. New walls, new temples, new palaces. The statue of Marduk was newly fashioned and ceremonially returned to the restored Esagila. Displaced inhabitants, those who had not been sold into slavery or who had survived in exile, were permitted to return. Esarhaddon personally participated in the rituals of the city's restoration, offering sacrifices to Marduk and declaring himself the rightful patron of Babylon. Why? Why would an Assyrian king rebuild a city his father had just destroyed with such effort? The answer is simple and cynical in equal measure. Esarhaddon understood what Sennacherib had not. Babylon could not be destroyed, it could only be claimed. While Babylon lay in ruins, it was a source of instability, an unhealed wound in the body of the region, a cause for hatred of Assyria among all peoples who revered Marduk. A restored Babylon meant legitimacy. It was a symbol that the Assyrian king was great enough not only to destroy, but to build. A political resource worth far more than ruins. This refers to a principle that all intelligent rulers understand. and all brutal ones do not. Symbols are not destroyed by force, symbols are seized. The restored Babylon began to grow again, but Assyria itself was by that time approaching its own end. In the late 7th century BCE, the Medes and the Babylonians united against it, and in 612 BCE, the Assyrian capital of Nineveh was taken and destroyed. The great war machine that had terrorized the Near East for centuries collapsed within a matter of years. And it was at this point that the Chaldeans stepped onto the stage. The Chaldeans were Semitic tribes that had settled in southern Babylonia several centuries earlier. They had long remained on the margins of the region's political life, preserving their own traditions and waiting for their moment. When the Assyrian Empire began to disintegrate, the Chaldean chieftain Nabopolassar did not wait for a formal invitation. In 626 BCE, he launched a revolt, seized power in Babylon, and proclaimed himself king. Thus, the Neo-Babylonian kingdom was born, also known as the Second Babylonian Kingdom or the Chaldean Empire. Nabopolassar was an astute politician and a far-sighted strategist. He allied with the Medes, finished off Assyria together with them, and occupied the position in the region that Assyria had vacated. But the Neo-Babylonian kingdom reached its true greatness under his son. That son's name is known to the entire world, even to those who have never taken any interest in the history of the ancient Near East. Nebuchadnezzar II. But that is the next block. Nebuchadnezzar II came to the throne in 604 BCE and ruled for 43 years. The same span as Hammurabi. A coincidence, but a meaningful one. The two greatest rulers of Babylon ruled for an identical length of time. Both left behind a city larger, wealthier, and more famous than they had founded. And both are remembered not merely as conquerors, but as builders. Men whose ambitions extended far beyond simple military dominance. Nebuchadnezzar inherited from his father a kingdom that had just destroyed Assyria and taken its place in the region. This was rich spoils, but also a heavy legacy. The new empire needed legitimacy, needed symbols, needed to demonstrate that it was worthy of occupying the position once held by the most powerful military machine the ancient world had known. Nebuchadnezzar understood this immediately, and his answer was construction. He rebuilt Babylon on a scale that apparently left contemporaries unable to believe what they were seeing. The city walls were so thick that by some accounts, 2 chariots could pass each other on top of them. The city's perimeter stretched approximately 18 kilometers. The main ceremonial route, the processional way, was paved with stone and decorated with relief images of lions, bulls, and dragons. The Ishtar Gate, the grand entrance to the city, was faced with glazed brick of vivid blue and adorned with golden figures of sacred animals. These gates, standing approximately 14 meters tall, were visible from a great distance and produced exactly the effect intended. You were not entering a city, you were entering a kingdom. This refers to a principle that every great builder from Egypt to Rome understood equally. Architecture is politics expressed in stone. Whoever builds the largest and most magnificent is the one who rules. But the greatest building project of Nebuchadnezzar, the one that is still spoken of today, was the Hanging Gardens. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The only one of the 7 whose location has never been definitively established. According to descriptions by classical authors, they were terraced gardens, rising in steps to a height of approximately 25 meters. Trees, shrubs, flowers. All of this grew on artificial stone and fired brick terraces above the scorching Babylonian plain. The water supply system operated around the clock, lifting water upward by mechanisms whose operating principles historians are still working to reconstruct. To whom were these gardens dedicated? According to the most widely held account, to the Median princess Amytis, the wife of Nebuchadnezzar. She had grown up in the mountains and longed for greenery on the flat Babylonian plain. The king built her mountains, man-made ones, in the middle of the desert. This was either the greatest romantic gesture in the history of the ancient world or a grandiose political symbol, a demonstration that the Babylonian king could alter nature itself. Most likely, it was both at once. At the same time, it must be said plainly, the physical existence of the Hanging Gardens has not been confirmed archaeologically. Not a single unambiguous physical trace has been found on the territory of Babylon. Some researchers believe the gardens existed, but were located not in Babylon, but in Nineveh, and were incorrectly attributed to Nebuchadnezzar by later authors. Others consider the gardens a legend that grew from a real but considerably more modest garden complex. The truth here, as is so often the case with antiquity, is beyond reach. But the image remained, and that image itself became part of the history of Babylon, inseparable from it. This refers to a particular quality of great cities. Their myths become as real as their stones. But Nebuchadnezzar was not only a builder, he was a conqueror, ruthless, purposeful, and consistent. His military campaigns covered enormous territories: Syria, Phoenicia, Egypt, Judea. It was here, in Judea, that an event occurred which entered not merely history, it entered the Bible, the religious memory of millions of people, and is still discussed in synagogues, churches, and academic lecture halls around the world. In 601 BCE, the kingdom of Judah refused to pay tribute to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar responded with a military campaign. In 598 BCE, he took Jerusalem for the first time and deported part of the Judean nobility and craftsmen to Babylon. It was a warning. Judah did not heed it. In 589 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar returned, this time without warnings. Jerusalem was besieged and fell after a prolonged siege in 587 BCE. The Temple of Solomon, the central sanctuary of the Jewish people, the place where, according to Jewish belief, God himself dwelt, was razed to the ground. The city walls were demolished. A substantial portion of the population was driven to Babylon. This event entered history as the Babylonian Captivity, one of the greatest national catastrophes in the history of the Jewish people. The captives lived in Babylon for several decades, according to biblical accounts, in varying conditions. Some were reduced to slavery. Some retained relative freedom and even achieved notable positions at the Babylonian court. It was during the period of the Babylonian captivity that many of the texts later incorporated into the Old Testament were recorded and systematized. The tragedy of exile gave impetus to the creation of one of the greatest literary and religious bodies of work in human history. This refers to a paradox that history has repeated many times over. The most devastating periods in the life of a people not infrequently prove the most productive for its culture and self-understanding. Catastrophe is sometimes the only thing that compels people to write down what they know before it disappears forever. Nebuchadnezzar II died in 562 BCE. After him, the Neo-Babylonian kingdom survived for only 23 years. 4 kings changed hands in that time. One was overthrown, another killed, a third held the throne for less than a year. The empire, built on the genius of 2 men, Nabopolassar and his son, proved too dependent on the character of its ruler to survive the absence of such a character. In 539 BCE, a Persian army under the command of Cyrus the Great approached the walls of Babylon. The last Babylonian king, Nabonidus, was inside the city. His army was there too. But the city did not fight. According to some sources, the gates of Babylon were opened without a battle, either because the Persians employed a stratagem, diverting the waters of the Euphrates and entering the city along the riverbed, or because the priests of Marduk, dissatisfied with Nabonidus's religious policies, themselves preferred to change masters. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. The great Neo-Babylonian kingdom ended in a single night. without an epic final battle, without a heroic last defense. Quietly, almost unremarkably, this is how many empires end, not from a blow delivered from outside, but from an emptiness that has grown within. Cyrus the Great entered Babylon in 539 BCE and did so with conspicuous courtesy. He did not destroy, he did not loot, he staged no public executions. He offered sacrifice to Marduk. He declared himself the rightful king of Babylon, chosen by the god himself. He freed the peoples deported by the Babylonians and permitted them to return to their homelands, including the Jews whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem. In Jewish tradition, Cyrus is venerated to this day as a liberator, the only non-believer in the Old Testament to be called the Anointed of God. This was not kindness, this was statecraft of the highest order. Cyrus understood what few conquerors before him had grasped. Subject peoples can be held in submission by force, but this is costly and unreliable. It is far more advantageous to give them what they want and receive loyalty in return. The liberation of the Jews cost Cyrus nothing. The reputation of a just and God-fearing king it earned him was immense. Babylon flourished initially under Persian rule. Under Darius I, who took the throne after Cyrus, the city became one of 4 capitals of the vast Persian Empire, alongside Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana. Part of the royal administration was based here. Scholars, astronomers, and mathematicians worked here. Babylonian science, in particular astronomy and mathematics, was at that time the finest in the world, and the Persians understood this perfectly. They did not dismantle the city's intellectual infrastructure. They put it to work for themselves. This refers to what distinguishes an intelligent empire from a crude one. An intelligent empire does not destroy foreign expertise, it conscripts it. But Persian rule was not without turbulence. Babylon revolted twice, under Darius I and under his successor Xerxes. Xerxes dealt with revolts without restraint. After suppressing the second uprising, he destroyed the chief temple of Marduk, the Esagila, and removed the statue of the god. For the Babylonians, this was a catastrophe of religious magnitude. Without the statue of Marduk, the city's principal rituals could not be performed. Without the rituals, the entire system of sacred legitimacy collapsed. Babylon was gradually losing what had kept it afloat through its darkest periods, its status as a holy city. For the next century and a half, the city lived on momentum, wealthy, densely populated, commercial, but no longer great in the old sense, no longer a center. No longer a symbol, simply a large city in a large empire, one of many. And then Alexander came. In 331 BCE, the Macedonian army crushed the Persians at Gaugamela. The Persian Empire, which had existed for more than 2 centuries, collapsed within a matter of months. Alexander the Great entered Babylon, and again, as Cyrus once had, he did so without violence. The city opened its gates. The priests of Marduk came out to meet him. Alexander offered sacrifice to the god and announced the restoration of the Esagila. For Babylon, this was its last genuine flourishing. Alexander made the city his eastern capital. He planned construction on a grand scale, a new harbor, new temples, new districts. According to some sources, he intended to make Babylon the principal capital of his entire empire, which by that time stretched from Greece to India. This would have been an extraordinary reversal of fortune for a city that had been burned and looted so many times. But Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE. He was 32 years old. The cause has never been definitively established. Theories range from poisoning to the cumulative effects of years of battle wounds and excessive consumption of wine. He died in the very city he had intended to make the center of the world. And with him died Babylon's last chance at revival. This refers to the way history operates. It does not give second chances to cities that have already missed their first. Babylon received its last chance in 323 BCE and lost it on the same night Alexander closed his eyes. After Alexander's death, his empire immediately began to fragment. His generals, the Diadochi, divided it among themselves and proceeded to war with one another. Babylon found itself in a zone of constant military conflict. The city changed hands among the various Hellenistic kingdoms. The construction begun by Alexander was abandoned. New rulers built new capitals. So it was that Seleucia on the Tigris rose nearby, built specifically as the administrative center of the Seleucid Empire. Part of Babylon's population was resettled there by force. This was a deliberate blow to the city. The new capital was built in part from Babylon's resources and people. Over the following centuries, the process of extinction became irreversible. From the 2nd century BCE, Babylon passed under Persian rule again, this time under the Parthian and then the Sasanian dynasty. It had no political significance whatsoever. Its commercial importance was minimal. Merchants, craftsmen, and scholars gradually left. The population shrank. Districts emptied. Temples crumbled without repair. The traditions of Babylonian culture, astronomy, mathematics, cuneiform literature, faded alongside the city. The last known cuneiform text dates to the 1st century CE. After that, silence. The language spoken in Babylon for millennia ceased to be used. The writing system it had produced fell out of use. The knowledge accumulated here, generation after generation, dissolved into other cultures. Greek, Arab, Persian, or simply disappeared. In the 7th century CE, Arab armies under the banner of Islam swept across the entire region. The Persian Sasanian Empire fell. Mesopotamia became part of the Arab Caliphate. For Babylon, this changed nothing. By that point, it was so insignificant that Arab chronicles barely mention its conquest. There was nothing left to conquer, nothing left to take. In the centuries that followed, the former first metropolis of the world became a village. Local inhabitants quarried the ancient bricks for building material, and so the stones that had once formed walls capable of withstanding a siege were scattered across Iraq. Mounds grew over the ruins, not from construction, but from the accumulation of debris and rubble. The great city was sinking into the earth, layer by layer, slowly and silently. When European travelers reached this place in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found a few low mounds in the desert and a village with a small population. No visible signs that a city once stood here that the entire ancient world had known. No columns, no arches, no monuments above the ground. Only mounds, wind, and local inhabitants who had no idea they were living on the ruins of the first metropolis in human history. This refers to how all empires end, not with an explosion, but with silence. Not with catastrophe, but with a gradual dissolving into the ordinary. The most terrible ending is when no one notices that something has ended at all. If you want to see Babylon, go to Berlin. That is not a joke. The best preserved part of the greatest city of the ancient world stands today in a German museum, thousands of kilometers from Iraq, and every day tourists stare at it with guidebooks in hand and paper cups of coffee. The Ishtar Gate, the grand entrance to Babylon, built on the orders of Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BCE, was removed by German archaeologists in the early 20th century, reconstructed from thousands of fragments and installed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, where it remains to this day. The reconstructed section stands nearly 14 meters tall, a vivid blue glazed surface, golden figures of lions, bulls, and the Mushushu, a dragon with scales, eagle's talons, and a serpent's tail, the sacred animal of Marduk. This is not a replica, it is the original. genuine bricks from the 6th century BCE, assembled in the same order in which Babylonian builders once laid them. And now, what remains where Babylon actually stood? 90 kilometers south of Baghdad, near the modern Iraqi city of Hilla, lies what is conventionally called the ruins of Babylon. The word ruins here requires qualification. An ordinary visitor, arriving with the expectation of seeing something resembling the Acropolis or the Colosseum, will be disappointed. No standing columns, no arches, no monuments. What remains of Babylon is, above all, earth, mounds, embankments, irregularities in the terrain concealing layers of millennia. These mounds are called tells, an Arabic word denoting an artificial or semi-artificial hill formed by the accumulation of cultural layers on the site of an ancient settlement. Each tell is a kind of layered cake of history. The deeper you go, the older it gets. The Babylonian tells extend tens of meters into the ground. They have not been fully excavated to this day, partly because of the complexity of the work, partly because of political instability in the region, and partly because modern methods allow researchers to study certain layers without physically opening the ground. This refers to the fact that archaeology is always a race against time, politics, and funding, and Babylon has been losing that race for decades. Tel Babel is the tallest of the mounds, located in the northern part of the site. Beneath it lie the ruins of the northern palace of Nebuchadnezzar II. It was here that the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey conducted excavations in the early 20th century, and it was his expedition that removed the fragments of the Ishtar Gate to Berlin. Today, the tell is partially open to visitors, but much of what was excavated has been reburied or destroyed, including as a result of construction work carried out by Saddam Hussein in the 1980s and 1990s, when he built his own palace directly above the ancient ruins, using bricks stamped with the inscription, "Built by Saddam Hussein, son of Nebuchadnezzar, for the prosperity of Iraq." This is not an anecdote, it is a documented historical fact. And it says something important about how power and memory operate. Tel Qasr lies closer to the center of the site. Beneath it may lie the remains of the southern palace of Nebuchadnezzar, the very palace traditionally associated with the Hanging Gardens. The word may is essential here. Excavations at this tell have produced contradictory results. Massive vaulted underground chambers were uncovered, which some researchers interpret as part of the irrigation system required to water the garden terraces. Others regard these chambers as warehouses or storage rooms. There is no definitive answer. The Hanging Gardens, if they existed here at all, left behind nothing that would allow anyone to say with certainty, "Here they are." Tel Merkis lies to the east and contains primarily residential structures, houses, streets, household objects. This is not the most visually impressive part of the excavations in terms of monumentality, but it is here that archaeologists gained the clearest picture of what an ordinary Babylonian neighborhood looked like. How the houses were built, how the streets were arranged, how the people lived, the people who were not kings or priests, but simply lived, traded, raised children, paid taxes, and died in the same city where they were born. The San Plateau is a broad, low-lying area in the central part of the site. In antiquity, the enormous ziggurat of Etemenanke stood here. A ziggurat is a stepped tower characteristic of Mesopotamian religious architecture. Etemenanke translates from Sumerian as "house of the foundation of heaven and earth." According to researchers' reconstructions, it had 7 tiers and reached a height of approximately 90 meters. A temple to Marduk stood at its summit. The structure was so enormous that it was visible from many kilometers away and served as the city's principal visual landmark. It is Etemenanke that most researchers consider the most probable real-world inspiration for the Tower of Babel in the Book of Genesis. Not because this has been documented conclusively, because it is the only structure on the territory of Babylon that matches the biblical description in scale and religious significance. Today, all that remains of Etemenanke is a foundation pit with groundwater at the bottom. The tower that may have given rise to one of the most famous stories in the Bible is now a hole in the ground. This entire site, the mounds, the pits, the open excavations, and the filled-in trenches, is protected by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. The designation was granted in 2019. This means international recognition of the site's value. It does not mean the site is well preserved. The actual condition of the Babylonian ruins is a separate scandal, one that tends to be discussed quietly. Throughout the 20th century, the site was systematically damaged. The excavations of the early century were conducted according to the standards of the time, which is to say, with a methodological crudeness that would today be classified as vandalism. The construction works under Saddam Hussein inflicted additional irreparable damage. In 2003 and 2004, American and Polish military forces established a base on the territory of ancient Babylon. Helicopter landing pads were leveled directly over archaeological layers. Soil was displaced by heavy machinery. UNESCO subsequently officially determined that significant damage had been caused by these actions. This refers to the fact that humanity is far better at talking about preserving heritage than at actually preserving it. Today, the site of Babylon contains a small museum, several reconstructed wall fragments, and tourist infrastructure of the most modest kind. Few visitors come. Iraq is not among the world's popular tourist destinations for reasons that require no explanation. Those who do make the journey see mounds, dust, a few explanatory signs, and a reconstructed section of the processional way with copies of the relief images. The original reliefs are in Berlin, London, Paris, New York, and Istanbul. Babylon was dismantled and distributed among the museums of the world. It is literally no longer in its own place. The best of what remains from it is in other countries, in climate-controlled galleries, behind glass, with lighting and information panels in 5 languages. The worst of what remains is where it once stood, in the form of mounds, pits, and filled-in trenches in the Iraqi desert. The first metropolis in the world deserved a better end than this. There are stories that outlive cities, that outlive empires, that outlive the languages in which they were written. The Tower of Babel is one of those stories. The city itself long ago became mounds of dust in the Iraqi desert. But the story of what happened on its territory, or on the territory that later authors identified with it, continues to live in every language in the world. Literally, because it is precisely the origin of languages that the story is about. The Book of Genesis. Chapter 11. One of the shortest and most densely packed texts in the entire Old Testament. 9 verses, and into them is compressed an explanation of one of the central questions that people have asked themselves across millennia. Why do we not understand one another? Why do nations speak different languages? Why does a barrier exist between people that cannot be overcome by the simple desire to cross it? The Bible's answer is direct and merciless, because God decided it should be so. And He made that decision not arbitrarily, but in response to a specific human action, to their attempt to build a tower reaching to the heavens. The story begins with the statement that the whole earth had one language and one speech. People were moving eastward and settled on a plain in the land of Shinar, that is, in Mesopotamia, in the very region where Babylon stood. They learned to make bricks and to fire them. And they made a decision. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. It is worth pausing here and reading this text carefully. The people want to make a name for themselves. They do not want to be scattered. They want to remain together and to leave behind something so monumental that their name will not be forgotten. This is not blasphemy in any obvious sense. This is ambition. the desire for greatness, the desire not to disappear. This alone, and nothing else, provokes the wrath of God. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." God does not destroy the tower. He does not punish the builders physically. He does something more subtle and more devastating. He strips them of the ability to reach agreement. The builders begin to speak in different languages. They cease to understand one another. The project collapses not from an outside force. It collapses from within, from the impossibility of coordination. The people scatter across the earth. The tower is left unfinished. This refers to one of the most precise political observations in the history of human thought. The most grandiose projects do not fail from a shortage of resources or from external enemies. They fail when the participants can no longer understand one another. The very word Babel in this text is used as an explanation. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. In ancient Hebrew, the word balal means to mix or to confuse. Babel is the place of mixing, the place where unity became multiplicity, where order became chaos. This etymology is not linguistically accurate. The Akkadian name of the city, Bab-ilu, meant gate of God rather than confusion. But the etymological wordplay in the biblical text is deliberate. The author uses the resemblance in sound to transform the name of a real city into the symbol of a universal condition. And this symbol proved so durable that it outlasted everything. Today, the word Babel, in its figurative sense, denotes chaos, confusion, an incompatible mixture. The English phrase, a Babel of voices, has passed into everyday speech. A metaphor born 3,000 years ago in a text written in ancient Hebrew continues to live in daily conversation. But the Tower of Babel is not the only image linking Babylon to the Bible. There is another, less known to the general public, but no less significant, and it is connected again to Nebuchadnezzar. The book of the prophet Daniel. The second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, the king has a dream. Not simply a dream, but a vision that throws him into such agitation that he cannot sleep. He summons wise men, diviners, astrologers, and demands that they not merely interpret the dream, but first divine its content, without any hint from the king himself. The logic is ironclad. If you are truly wise and speak with the gods, tell me what I dreamed. The wise men cannot do it. The king sentences them to death. The only one who succeeds is a young Judean named Daniel, one of the captives taken by Nebuchadnezzar from Jerusalem. He asks for time, prays to his God, and receives a revelation. He goes to the king and tells him the dream. Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed of an enormous statue, a colossal human figure standing before him. The head of the statue was of pure gold. The chest and arms were of silver. The belly and thighs were of bronze. The legs were of iron, and the feet, partly of iron, partly of clay. And then a stone broke loose from a mountain, without any human hand, and struck the statue on its feet. And the statue fell. It shattered to dust, and the stone became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. Daniel provides the interpretation. The golden head is Nebuchadnezzar himself and his kingdom. After him will come kingdoms less great, of silver, of bronze, of iron. And finally, a kingdom divided within itself as iron is mixed with clay, partly strong, partly fragile. It will attempt to hold itself together, through marriages, through alliances, through treaties, but it will not hold, because iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of that final kingdom, God will establish his own kingdom, which will crush all others and will stand forever. The image of the colossus on feet of clay has since become one of the most enduring metaphors in world culture. It denotes a system that appears powerful and unshakable, but rests on a fundamentally unreliable foundation. On the outside, gold and iron. At the base, clay. A single blow in the right place, and everything collapses. This refers to an experience familiar to anyone who has lived long enough to watch something fall that seemed eternal. The Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, financial empires that had existed for decades, political systems that seemed unassailable, reputations built over years. Each of them had feet of clay. It simply was not visible from the outside, until they fell. The prophecy of Daniel was addressed to a specific historical moment, the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdoms of the ancient Near East that followed him. But its imagery proved so universal that each subsequent generation applied it to its own era, and each time found a suitable candidate for the role of the colossus on feet of clay. Because such a candidate exists in every era. Because all great powers ultimately stand on clay. The only question is when the stone will come. And that question, about when and from where the stone will come, leads us to the next text, to the darkest, most enigmatic, and most provocative image of Babylon in the entire biblical tradition. To the revelation of John, to the great harlot, to the end of the world. The revelation of John, the final book of the Bible, was written approximately at the close of the 1st century CE. By that time, the real Babylon had ceased to exist as a significant city for several centuries already. It was a provincial village, ruins, a memory. And it was at precisely this moment that the author of Revelation, traditionally identified with the Apostle John, though this question remains contested in theological scholarship, took the name of a dead city and made it the central symbol of the end of time. Not Rome, not Jerusalem, not Alexandria, Babylon. A city that no longer existed became the name of something that had yet to come. This itself demands explanation. Why use the name of a city that was gone? The answer lies in the very nature of apocalyptic literature. It does not describe reality directly. It speaks in symbols, images, numbers, beasts, and women, because direct language under conditions of political persecution was dangerous, and symbolic language was understood by those for whom it was intended, and not understood by those from whom it needed to be concealed. Babylon in Revelation is a cipher, a name that stands for something else. What exactly? On that, more in a moment. First, the text itself. In the 17th and 18th chapters of Revelation, an image appears that has given no peace to theologians, artists, and politicians for 2,000 years. One of 7 angels says to John, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." And John sees a woman. She sits on a scarlet beast covered with blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman herself is clothed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones and pearls. In her hand is a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Pause on this image. Read it slowly. Purple and scarlet are the colors of royal power and wealth. Gold, pearls, precious stones are a luxury that blinds. The golden cup is the temptation held to the lips. On the outside, everything gleams. Inside, abomination. This is the portrait of a system that seduces with beauty and destroys those who yield. This is the image of power that sells itself as good and is evil. The angel then explains the symbolism. The 7 heads of the beast are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and 7 kings. The 10 horns are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive authority for 1 hour with the beast. The waters on which the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. She is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And in the end, the beast itself and the 10 kings will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. And then, the fall. The 18th chapter of Revelation is a funeral lament over Babylon, which has collapsed. Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit. The kings of the earth who committed fornication with her weep and lament over her. The merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise any more. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. And a voice from heaven says, "Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her." In 1 hour. That expression appears 3 times in the 18th chapter. In 1 hour your judgment has come. In 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. In 1 hour she is made desolate. 3 blows of the same phrase. The author insists, not gradual fading, not slow decline, instantaneous destruction. What was built over centuries and seemed eternal will vanish in 1 hour. Without warning, without the possibility of escape. This refers to what makes the revelation of John fundamentally different from any historical text. It does not explain the past, it warns about the future, or claims to warn. And that is precisely what has kept it so alive for 2,000 years. Now, the central question, the one for which there is no and can be no definitive answer. What is Babylon in the revelation of John? The first version, and the most historically grounded, Babylon is Rome. At the moment Revelation was written, the Roman Empire was the dominant world power, the principal persecutor of Christians, and the chief embodiment of what the author called the kingdom of corruption. The 7 mountains on which the harlot sits are the 7 hills of Rome. This is a well-known topographical fact that no educated reader of the 1st century could have failed to notice. The use of the name Babylon instead of Rome was politically necessary. A direct accusation against the empire would have cost the author his life. The cipher was clear to those for whom it was intended. The second version. Babylon is Jerusalem. This interpretation is less popular, but has its serious proponents. The argument, it is Jerusalem that Revelation calls the city where also our Lord was crucified. It is in Jerusalem that the blood of the prophets was shed. Certain details of the description of the harlot correspond better to the image of Old Testament Israel that had strayed from its covenant with God than to the image of pagan Rome. The third version. Babylon is the image of any great world system founded on power, wealth, and oppression, not a specific city, not a specific empire, a principle, a phenomenon, something that arises again and again throughout history under different names, and ends the same way each time. Many contemporary theologians hold this interpretation, and it explains precisely why the image of the great harlot has proved so durable. It is applicable to any era because it is not tied to any specific one. The fourth version, the most provocative. Babylon in Revelation is the Christian church that has fallen away from the faith. A version supported by certain reformers of the 16th century, above all, opponents of Catholic Rome. They pointed to the purple and the gold, to the power over the kings of the earth, to the wealth, to the commerce in the sacred. This interpretation was a political weapon in the hands of the Protestant Reformation and remains a subject of sharp disagreement to this day. None of these versions is proven, none is refuted. The text is deliberately constructed to be simultaneously specific and universal. Specific because it is addressed to real people in a real historical situation. Universal because its images transcend any specific situation and function in any era. This refers to what distinguishes a great text from a merely good one. A great text speaks to every reader about their own time, regardless of when it was written. Babylon in Revelation is not a prophecy about a specific city that will be destroyed on a specific day. It is a diagnosis of a system that seduces, corrupts, and ultimately devours itself. A system that gleams on the outside and rots within. A system that holds in its golden cup what it calls a blessing, and what is in reality a poison. And here is what matters to understand at the very end. When John wrote his Revelation, Babylon was already dead. The real Babylon, the city of brick and stone, the city of Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar, the city of hanging gardens and the Ishtar Gate, it no longer existed. It had become a village, mounds, dust. The author of Revelation took the name of a dead city and made it the name of an eternal phenomenon. He said, "Look at what remains of Babylon, and know, everything that resembles it will end the same way. Any system built on the same foundation will collapse into the same dust. The stone that broke loose from the mountain without any human hand. It is still in motion. The great Babylon fell, the first in 539 BCE. The second, according to the book of Revelation, is still to come. And whose turn is next? You decide. Babylon began as a village in the desert, became the first metropolis in the world, was burned, flooded, looted, rebuilt, and disappeared regardless. And its name outlasted all of it: armies, empires, languages, and millennia. Today it stands in the final book of the Bible as a symbol of something that has yet to arrive. Here is the question worth leaving with. If Babylon is not a city but a principle, then where is it today? What exactly is holding the golden cup right now and smiling? Write it in the comments. That is not a rhetorical question. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video gave you something, hit the like button. It is not just a button. It is a signal to the algorithm that content like this is worth showing to people. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss the next episode. We take history apart the way it was never taught in school. No cuts, no flattery, no comfortable silences. Babylon fell. The next episode coming soon.